Did you ever realize how many final cartoon episodes from the 80s left you staring at the screen with burning eyes, wishing endings didn't feel so heavy? Today, you're stepping back into the last moments of the shows that shaped you, those quiet, unprepared goodbyes that stayed with you longer than you ever admitted. The Return of Optimus Prime, Part 2, The Transformers. You didn't know a cartoon could make you feel vulnerable until you watched this final broadcast-era story unfold. You remember the glow of the television, the metallic hum inside the speakers, the way the Autobots' colors, those rich cobalt blues, chrome silvers, and fiery reds, shimmered like they were alive. You can still hear the clatter of gears as characters shifted forms, that mechanical symphony that made your heart race. In this episode, everything felt louder, sharper, more desperate. Optimus Prime was back, but the world around him was falling apart under the hate plague. Even as a child, you sensed this wasn't just another problem to fix. This felt like the final test. You didn't know that Optimus Prime's earlier death had devastated so many children that Hasbro scrambled to bring him back. You just knew your chest tightened when Optimus reappeared, not as a hero restored, but as a leader carrying the weight of the entire galaxy on his shoulders. The final scenes remain vivid, the Matrix glowing with cosmic light, Optimus releasing its wisdom to cleanse the universe, the screen washed in white-blue brilliance, so bright you squinted, and when the light faded, something inside you recognized a quiet farewell, not a dramatic send-off, just a soft closing of a story that meant more to you than you understood at the time. The Cold Zone, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. You didn't need fireworks to feel the impact of this final episode. He-Man gave you something subtler, something that lingered in your memory like a half-lit room. This episode didn't announce itself as the last chapter, but your heart recognized the shift. It was the final time you'd see Adam lift his sword and shout the words that sent chills through your spine. Think back to the sensory rhythm of that transformation, the way the sky behind him would explode into molten gold, how the power sword crackled with electric light, how the music swelled like a wave crashing into you. You didn't just watch the transformation, you absorbed it. You saw the familiar palette of Eternia, the pastel meadows, the strange alien trees, the towering cliffs that always looked like carved gemstones. But in this episode, the tone was calmer, more reflective, like the show was preparing to slip out quietly. The show didn't get a true finale because the toy line began to fade, budgets shifted, markets changed, and you were left sitting there cross-legged on the floor, unaware that you were watching He-Man for the last time. No celebration, no closure, just a gentle fade out that left you feeling like something had been taken from you without permission. Final victory, Voltron, Defender of the Universe. Before the episode even started, you knew this show was different. The thrill you felt every time the 5 robotic lions connected wasn't just excitement, it was almost ritualistic. When this finale aired, it struck you with a mix of tension, wonder, and emotional closure. You remember the sensory world of Voltron, the cosmic darkness of outer space, broken by neon blues and crimson streaks of enemy fire, the metallic clang of the lions docking together, each sound effect layered like an orchestra of steel and circuitry. And then the final snap, the moment Voltron stood tall, gleaming like a galactic guardian forged from pure light. This last episode didn't just deliver action, it delivered finality. The stakes felt higher, Zarkon's forces tightening their grip, Princess Allura's voice trembling with urgency, the pilots pushing themselves to the brink. Voltron was a patchwork creation, parts of different Japanese shows re-edited into a single American narrative. You didn't know that. You only felt the emotional coherence, the symbolic power of 5 individuals merging into one hero. Voltron's final battle wasn't just about defeating evil, it was about affirming that unity makes even the most impossible battles winnable. The Capeman Cometh, Inspector Gadget. This ending didn't feel like an ending until the silence afterward made your heart feel strangely heavy. The episode carried all the familiar rhythms, the clumsy bravado, Penny's quiet genius, Brain's frantic problem-solving, Dr. Claw's booming rage. But buried beneath the jokes was an unspoken farewell. Picture the sensory layers, the familiar mechanical whir of gadgets popping out of impossible places, the soft digital chirps of Penny's computer book, the sinister rumble of Dr. Claw's voice delivering his iconic threat. "I'll get you next time, Gadget, next time." That line was the emotional glue of the entire series. It meant continuity, it meant stability. Inspector Gadget didn't get a proper finale because the creators didn't plan for one. It was episodic, built for syndication, not closure, but you didn't need a formal ending to feel the weight of that last freeze frame. Dr. Claw's fist hitting the desk didn't promise next time, it whispered goodbye, and you learned something quietly heartbreaking, that endings don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they just arrive. The Book of Omens, Thundercats. You didn't expect Thundercats to break you emotionally, but this final episode felt like a goodbye written in a language you didn't yet understand. When this episode began, it didn't feel like an ending at first. It felt like a discovery, the kind you sensed might change something inside you. You remember the colors of Third Earth, those deep sunsets drenched in reds and purples, the metallic shine of Lion-O's claw shield, the eerie glow of Mum-Ra's lair. The sound effects were sharp and physical, the whoosh of the Sword of Omens slicing the air, the echoing chant that always made your skin prickle. In this episode, everything became slower, quieter, more symbolic. Lion-O wasn't swinging a sword to save the day. He was confronting the truth about himself. The book didn't show him villains to defeat. It showed him his own flaws, his impulsiveness, his doubts. It was a story about growing up, about seeing yourself clearly for the first time, and realizing childhood doesn't last forever. The creative team decided to close with a moral reflection, rather than a dramatic battle. It told you something your young mind wasn't fully prepared for, that self-knowledge is a harder battle than any monster. The Golden Goose Part 2, Ducktales. If you ever doubted that adventure cartoons could make you emotional, this episode reminded you just how fragile your young heart really was. DuckTales had always felt like a burst of energy, bright colors, zippy music, Scrooge's Scottish growl, but that final episode shifted something. You remember the shimmering gold that filled the screen, the way everything the Golden Goose touched turned to lifeless metal. You remember watching the characters you loved frozen in gold, their expressions trapped mid-motion. Gold was supposed to represent wealth, success, luck, but here it felt like death, silent, cold, final. The sensory details stay sharp, Scrooge's voice trembling for the first time, the rising fear in Huey, Dewey, and Louie's eyes, the hollow metallic echo when something struck the golden surfaces. You were witnessing an animated metaphor for greed consuming everything. And then came Scrooge's emotional shift, the moment he realized wealth meant nothing if it cost him the people he loved. As a child, you felt the ache under that simplicity. As an adult, you recognize how rare it is for a children's show to end on moral weight rather than spectacle. A Father Should Be, Jem and the Holograms. You didn't expect Jem and the Holograms to break your heart, but this episode wasn't just a finale, it was an emotional reckoning. Bright pink neon, electric synth beats, dazzling stage lights, all the things that normally made the show sparkle seemed dimmer in this final chapter. The story wasn't about rivalry or concerts, it centered on Jerrica's painful memories of her father, his absence, his expectations, the legacy he left behind. You watched her struggle with responsibility, identity, and the weight of becoming an adult before she was ready. Her songs sounded more like cries for help than pop anthems. This wasn't meant as a series finale. Production just stopped, ratings dipped, toys slowed, and executives moved on. But fate chose this as the final note. A story about a young woman realizing she didn't have to be perfect, she just had to be present. It taught you that the most emotional endings don't come from explosions, but from unresolved wounds finally opening to the light. The Halloween Door, The Real Ghostbusters. You didn't expect an 80s cartoon to deliver an existential gut punch disguised as a holiday episode, but this one did exactly that. It was eerie, atmospheric, and unsettling in ways you couldn't articulate as a child. The sensory palette was always vivid, neon greens, glowing purples, eerie blues, Slimer's translucent body wobbling across the frame, proton beams crackling with jittery light. But in this episode, the colors felt darker, the shadows thicker, the stakes heavier. It didn't feel like a spooky adventure. It felt like the world was genuinely at risk. You remember the sensation of unease when the anti-Halloween zealot opened a tear between dimensions. The ghosts felt more monstrous, less comedic. This was the show's final episode before the format was changed and tone softened. The original creative energy was closing its doors, and this finale did something rare. It treated Halloween not as a joke, but as a cultural ritual tied to imagination and the collective need to face our fears. The message was quiet but powerful. Destroying what you fear only makes it stronger. Accepting it gives you control. The Garden of Zin, The Smurfs. You remember how Saturday mornings felt different when the Smurfs came on. There was always something soft in its rhythm, something that felt like being wrapped in a blue-tinted blanket. And when you watch this episode, the one that brought the last big emotional turn before the show shifted into its later era format, you didn't expect it to hit you the way it did. It begins with that eerie mist rolling through the forest. Remember that soft humming underneath the soundtrack? You can still picture the muted green of the leaves trembling, the strange glow of the Zin flower breathing in the dark. The Smurfs, usually full of laughter, move carefully through the trees. This wasn't the playful world you were used to. This was the forest growing sick, aging right before your eyes. And when Smurfette nearly fades into a statue because of the flower's curse, you remember that choking pause. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Papa Smurf, I'm scared." It was the first time you saw fragility in a character you thought would always be safe. Here was a story about decay, sacrifice, and the fear of losing someone you didn't know you cared about until they were slipping away. The Prince and the Pauper, the Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. You didn't expect Rescue Rangers to make you emotional. It was the fun cartoon. the one with inventions that popped and plots that felt like candy. But this episode slipped under your skin in a way you didn't see coming. You're pulled into that rich old world kingdom with its red banners, golden staircases, and the faint metallic ring of palace trumpets. It felt like stepping into a fairy tale. Chip and Dale arrive in the middle of a kingdom arguing over the future king, one mouse prince too overwhelmed to lead, and one lookalike commoner who wants nothing to do with royalty. You saw the tremble in the prince's hands when he lifted the crown, that tiny flicker of fear because everyone expected greatness from him when all he wanted was to be ordinary. The heart of it is the switch. The prince hides. The commoner must pretend to be royal. And suddenly you're watching a story about pretending to be stronger than you feel. When Dale reassures the commoner mouse by saying, "Let's get it out, it's just be you," that's enough. You probably didn't fully understand the weight behind that line, but today you can hear your adult self whispering that same sentence on nights where you feel lost or not enough. The once and future star, Silverhawks. You don't talk about Silverhawks enough, but when you think back to that gleaming metallic universe, the chrome suits, the wide blue of limbo, the electric hum of space, you remember a specific ache settling into your stomach during this episode. The story centers on a washed-up space hero, a legend from the old days whose fame has rotted into bitterness. He was a reminder that even heroes can grow tired, even legends can fall out of rhythm. The emotional core hits when he reveals why he quit. Everyone he once knew had outgrown him. Maybe it was the way his voice cracked, or the soft piano swell beneath his confession. You sensed something too adult, too real, too close to the fear that someday you might be left behind too. The animation shifts as they escort him through his memories, sepia-toned flashbacks glowing like old home movies, and then he sacrifices himself to save the Silverhawks, choosing one final, brilliant act instead of fading quietly. His body drifts into space, wrapped in light. The team salutes him in silence. You weren't watching a show about cybernetic heroes. You were watching the fear of growing irrelevant, the hope of being remembered. The end of M.A.S.K, Mobile Armored Strike Command. You didn't expect M.A.S.K to leave you emotional. It was the cool show, the one with transforming vehicles that made your imagination spark. But when this episode aired as the final narrative closure, something inside you tightened. You remember how it begins. A dust storm sweeping over Boulder Hill, the sky painted in gritty oranges and browns, as if the world itself was bracing for something final. The hum of engines is lower than normal, slower, almost tired. You see Matt Tracker leaning on his console, face shadowed, shoulders tense. It's the first time you see him hesitate, really hesitate, before a mission. The emotional punch hits when Miles Mayhem reveals his plan, collapsing the entire M.A.S.K command network, and then Bruce calmly says, "If this is the final mask we wear, let it be one of courage." The sacrifice, Matt willingly disabling his own vehicle to destroy Venom's central device, felt like a punch to the heart. When the dust settles and the screen lingers on the broken terrain, you didn't know if Matt lived. The ambiguity was the point. It was childhood's first lesson in unresolved endings. The moving picture, the Care Bears. You didn't expect to cry watching the Care Bears, but you did. This episode hit that tender part of your heart that cartoons rarely touch so deliberately. The Care Bear cousins gather around a shimmering magical screen that shows memories from past adventures. You remember how the screen glowed soft pink and gold, but then the images begin to fade, not glitch, not distort, fade, as though time itself were gently erasing them. When Tenderheart quietly says, "Some memories disappear when they're needed most," something inside you sank. The plot reveals that a child somewhere is losing hope, and the fading memories are the result of that child's sadness draining the magic from the kingdom. Inside the child's room, a nightlight flickers weakly. The child is packing to move away from the only home they've known. The Care Bears aren't fighting a villain in this episode. They're fighting grief. The most emotional moment comes when the child says, "If I forget this place, then who will I be?" The Care Bears huddle around him. They don't promise everything will be okay. They promise he won't face the change alone. That quiet message stays with you. Some goodbyes don't end things. They reshape them. The greatest show in the galaxy, My Little Pony, 1986. You remember how My Little Pony filled your world with pastel skies and velvet-sounding magic, but this episode carried a weight you didn't expect. It opens with laughter, bright, airy, carnival laughter, but underneath there's something off. The colors were too bold, the shadows under the tents too deep, the music slightly out of tune. The ponies gather around a traveling circus promising the biggest show ever, but then the curtain rises, and the ringmaster's smile is wrong. He collects wonder, literally steals the joy and creativity from ponies, and uses it to power his everlasting show. The ponies start losing their spark, their colors dim, they lose their cutie marks, symbols of their very selves. As an adult, you recognize the metaphor, losing identity under pressure, losing joy to someone else's expectations, losing the parts of you that make you, you. The most emotional punch comes from Baby Lickety Split. Her tiny voice quivers as her colors start fading. I don't want to disappear. The ponies fight by remembering who they are, by calling out their happiest memories, by choosing connection over fear. When their colors return, you felt your own breath death return, and when the Ringmaster's circus collapses into dust, you remember the quiet sadness under the victory. The Dark Heart of Eternia, She-Ra, Princess of Power. You remember how powerful you felt watching She-Ra, the strength, the bravery, the music that felt like triumph baked into sound. But this episode wasn't a battle episode. It was something heavier, something that brushed against the edges of sacrifice and belonging. It begins with a sky that looks bruised, purples and blacks swirling like ink spilled across a storm. She-Ra and He-Man are summoned by a pulse, a heartbeat felt across magical realms. The discovery hits like a blow. Eternia's magic is dying because it has a heart, a literal magical core, and that heart is breaking because the people who once protected it no longer believe in it. Even as a child, that idea cracked something open inside you. Magic fading because people stop believing. The world dimming because hope grows thin. When She-Ra places her hand on the dying core and hears Eternia's voice, soft, exhausted, you felt a swell of sorrow you couldn't name but recognized deeply. The emotional peak comes when She-Ra realizes what she must give. Her own strength, not her weapon, not her title, her power. There's a moment where the screen fills with white light, her sword trembles, and when the transformation fades, she collapses to her knees, drained. He-Man catches her and whispers, "You don't have to do this alone." It taught you that even strength has limits, and even heroes need to rest. The last battle, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. This final episode had a weight you didn't expect. It wasn't about muscles or weapons. It was about choices, endings, and what it means to be responsible for the world you protect. It opens on a ruined Eternos, skies tinged red and gray, a wind whipping up dust and debris. The colors, usually bold and vibrant, were muted, suffused with an ominous glow that made the familiar city look fragile, mortal. Skeletor has returned with a plan more cunning than ever. You watch He-Man step into the desolation, sword raised, but there's a hesitation you've never seen. He knows he must fight not just for victory, but for what happens after the fight ends, the scene that truly lingers. He-Man, exhausted, kneeling among rubble, his sword planted like a monument. Skeletor retreats, not because he's defeated, but because He-Man demonstrates the courage to resist even when victory is uncertain. The lesson was subtle. Being a hero doesn't mean you win every fight. Sometimes it means surviving, reflecting, and taking responsibility for what comes next. The last laugh, Inspector Gadget. You didn't expect Inspector Gadget to end with any weight at all. It was slapstick, goofy, full of clanging metal and bumbling humor. But this episode hid an emotional undertone beneath the pratfalls. The episode opens with Dr. Claw in shadows, plotting one final scheme. Inspector Gadget arrives, oblivious to the danger, gadgets popping, arms extending in mechanical chaos. It's funny, it's absurd, but underneath there's tension. You remember the moment Penny whispers urgently, "Gadget, be careful," and her eyes, normally bright with optimism, are shadowed with worry. Gadget, accidentally heroic, foils Dr. Claw's plan, but the villain disappears into shadows, muttering threats you know might never return. The laughter dissolves, leaving a moment of calm. The chaos is over, but the threat lingers somewhere, unseen. Endings aren't total. The Journey's End, Voltron, Defender of the Universe. You remember the roar of engines, the fire of plasma cannons, and the awe of 5 lions uniting into one massive robot. But this episode didn't feel like spectacle. It felt like history, culmination, and memory. It opens with the team scattered across battle-scarred planets. The colors are darker than usual, deep purples and burnt oranges, skies streaked with smoke. But this time, there's stillness amid the chaos, a pause that signals something monumental. The episode isn't just about fighting Zarkon. It's about decisions, the lives lost, the world saved, the weight of responsibility pressing down on teenagers turned heroes. They must risk everything to close a dimensional rift that could swallow their universe. One lion is lost, and you remember feeling your stomach tighten at the sudden emptiness in the team formation. The finale teaches you about sacrifice. Courage isn't a flashy maneuver. It's choosing the hard path, protecting what matters, even when it costs dearly. When the rift finally closes, you remember the lingering uncertainty. Their universe is safe, but not unscarred. The Big Goodbye, the Transformers. Finally, we reach the emotional capstone to the Transformers 80s run, an episode that didn't just close a story, it closed an era of your childhood. You remember the first scenes, Cybertron, battered dust swirling in golden light, the hum of machinery settling into silence. Autobots and Decepticons alike face a final reckoning, not of explosions or combat, but of legacy. The episode centers on choice. Do they continue the endless war, or do they seek peace? Optimus Prime delivers his final speech, slow and weighted, about honor, duty, and sacrifice. Even as a child, you sense the gravity, the most heartbreaking moment. Bumblebee, small and unarmored compared to the towering warriors around him, hesitates. He remembers fallen comrades. The camera camera holds on his optics for a beat too long. You feel a tiny ache swelling in the pit of your stomach. Finally, the Autobots leave Earth, riding into the stars. The screen fades slowly to black. No triumphant music, no cheery narration, just silence. The weight of endings presses down gently, and even now, decades later, you can feel it. The sense that an era ended, that heroes you had imagined as eternal were, in their way, mortal, that sometimes endings are quiet, and that sometimes the lessons linger longer than the explosions. When Optimus Prime said, "Till all are one," did you feel hope? Or did you feel the first real ache of goodbye? Some of these final 80s cartoon episodes surely hit you harder than others. Those quiet moments, those unexpected farewells, those lessons wrapped in animation, they shaped something in you that never quite faded. And perhaps that's the real magic of these endings. They taught you, before you were ready, that goodbyes don't have to be loud to leave a mark. I'm sure some of these final 80s cartoon episodes hit you harder than others. To relive more unforgettable childhood memories with us, be sure to click on the card showing on the screen.